I think there will be more mining on the West Coast, and that's actually a good thing.
Triple mining and we might triple the environmental destruction.
Mining has been the backbone of the West Coast's, not just the economy, but the identity.
We don't need to keep both feet firmly in the past of extractive industries.
A Kiwi plateau divided.
In the next year, we're going to see diggers hitting places across New Zealand. We're going to see landscapes changing forever. And that's not good enough. That's not who we are.
We need to ask ourselves, do people really want to live in a wasteland, or do they want to look after what we have here and now?
There have been threats, pleas and protests.
Look, you can't be up here. We're trespassing you. You need to go back down.
There's no middle ground, just those passionately for and against.
It's a climate emergency.
Reefton is a mining town. You know, we wouldn't exist without mining.
So do you want more mining or less mining?
More.
The celebrated Coast Road will turn into an industrial mine haulage route. It's one of the top coastal drives in the world.
Yeah, the fact remains it is a state highway, so if they're going to improve the quality of the roading infrastructure, they need money. And guess what gives them money? Road users.
So we need those trucks.
Yep, we actually do. We do.
Kia ora, I'm Amanda Gillies, and today on The Detail, the fierce battle over mining on the Denniston Plateau on the West Coast. We look at what's been proposed, what it means for the economy and our ecology, and ultimately the cost for the country.
New Zealand's largest coal mine is trying to fast-track an expansion, and with that expansion will come expanded costs, both to the taxpayer and to the mining company. And the question now is, are those costs going to be worth what that mine pulls out of the ground?
That's Newsroom political reporter Fox Meyer, who has covered the story over the past year. Put simply, mining company Bathurst Resources wants to keep mining coal on the West Coast for another 25 years.
So the coal operation on the Denniston Plateau is New Zealand's largest coal mine. It's the Bathurst Tallies operation going on up there. It's where most of our coal comes from.
But most of the current consents are due to expire in 2027. So Bathurst is proposing to extend its mining operations via continuation of existing consents and securing new mining areas. A year ago, the company was approved to apply for consents under the government's fast-track legislation, but no application has been filed just yet. More on that shortly. First, though, the actual mining company and how it came to be on the West Coast.
BT Mining runs this operation. That's a joint venture between Bathurst, the B, and Tallies, the T there. 65% Bathurst, 35% Tallies. And this was set up as a group to purchase the prime assets of Solid Energy, which was the state-owned provider when that folded a few years ago. And one of the big assets there was the Stockton mine on the Denniston Plateau. So when that company folded and it was bought out by a partially offshore company here being Bathurst, the responsibility for carrying out the mining operations was transferred to them, but also the liabilities of previous impacts from mining. And the principal one there, at least the one that gets the most headlines, is acid mine drainage. And so this is a almost unavoidable consequence of mining, of resource mining, especially on the West Coast, where the rock that they're mining is inherently acidic. That's just the way it is. It's not necessarily a chemical they're pumping into it. It just has more sulfides in it than you'll get in other parts of the country. And when that rock is piled up, or the waste rock is piled up somewhere, and there's a tailings pond made to contain the flowouts from this, over time, the acids from those rocks seep into groundwater or can seep into drainage channels. Generally, these tailings ponds do have a seal on the bottom, but nothing lasts forever. And so we're starting to see some acid mine drainage come out of these historic mines on the Denniston Plateau, obviously a place where coal mining has been going on for generations. But the consequences of the older industry practices are coming to bear here. And the liability, which was once the responsibility of the state-owned enterprise, is now the responsibility of a private company. At least the current operations are. Historic damages are still the responsibility of the Crown. And so this is when we get into a situation where the New Zealand taxpayer is footing the bill to treat acid mine drainage for pre-Bathurst operations. We're still paying off the damages that that's going to cause. And it's going to go on for a long time.
And that was quite expensive, I understand, reading a story you did last year. The cost of that was in the millions, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So the 2023-2024 spend just on Stockton was $3.6 million, which is pretty significant just for one mine. And when I say just one mine, it's not like it's the same, not all mines are created equal. This is the source of most of our coal. This is a major operation.
It's a biggie.
It's not some small thing. It's a very biggie. So that number, though, 3.6 million, that same year, we earned, or the New Zealand government took in royalties about the same amount of money in royalties from coal exports. So you've got sort of an awkward situation here where the money that we're making in royalties from exporting this stuff is less than the amount of money we're having to spend to treat the damages from it in one location. That's not always true. The year before, the price of coal, I think, went up. There was something anomalous in the data there. We took in about $7 million. So, the value is halved. But going all the way back to 2011 in the data that I had, we spent about $3 million in 2023. That's more than we made in royalties in any of those years.
So let's talk the economics. For this proposal, supporters of it are saying it is fantastic for the region because it provides jobs, local income, infrastructure. It's a good thing.
New mining, good or bad?
Good. It brings income for families and it's good for community and yeah.
But how many? Do we know the numbers on how many jobs this will provide, what it does mean for the local industry?
So I've got the initial document provided by BT Mining to their fast track bid in front of me. And they say on here that in the Buller community, about 20% of the GDP comes from mining and 10% of the jobs rely on it. Bathurst operations on the West Coast directly employ 317 people. That's about 7% of the workforce in Buller. But this is not necessarily bigger than other industries. Agriculture and tourism on the West Coast are bigger in many communities. And so, yes, obviously there is a strong tie to the health and well-being of the community in an economic sense when a mine is active. But mines do close eventually. And in BT Mining's annual reports, they said that one of their big concerns for a lot of these operations is what happens to that community when they inevitably pull out. What is the exit strategy to make sure that they don't just pack up and leave this community high and dry?
This is an example of open cast coal mining that is set to invade this beautiful Denniston Plateau. It was developed in about 2014. It ran for 2 years. The coal price bottomed out and all that promised injection of wealth into the Buller district never happened. The number of staff that it employs could be counted on one hand, and that's to manage the acid mine drainage, which is a legacy problem from coal mining.
That's not the case for something like tourism, where so long as our glaciers are still there, which is its own question, there will be a draw to these areas. So when we think about mining and the impacts that it can have, we talk about the benefits and the well-being of the community that it supports, but it also literally can undermine that by putting these chemicals in the water that flows downstream to those communities, or creating a system in which they're reliant on the constant extraction of minerals here or of coal. Regardless of your opinion on how important those things are or the part they play in the world economy, you're looking at a situation where there's a limited resource in the ground that has to be extracted. And that is the lifeblood of this community in some cases. What happens when it runs out? That's a question of when, not if. And if we're applying to further this mine, to expand it, we can only do that so many times. And every time we do it, we're losing more of this habitat, which again is its own debate on the value that you may put on that. But at the end of the day, this is a limited resource.
Let's talk about that, because why, Fox? What makes this plateau so ecologically important? Which species are most at risk as a result of the mining?
When we talk about conservation or preservation, which are different things at the end of the day, but when we talk about ecosystem loss, for me, it's not necessarily about the individual species there. You could go run through all of the taxa present in a given location and try to assess how valuable that is and sort of make this weirdly economic argument about the value of an ecosystem. But for me, if it's a unique ecosystem, which this one is, just because it's such a strange combination of factors that have gone into building it.
It's a unique and rare ecosystem of sandstone and herb fields and wetlands. The great spotted kiwi live here. Some very special creatures up here on the Denniston Plateau.
You can't put a value on that. It is what it is. And if we lose it, it's gone. Even if there was another mirrored ecosystem somewhere else in the country, we're still losing the one that's there. And whose decision is that to make? Is it the mining industry's decision to put a value on that? Is it the local communities? Is it Tangata Whenua? Who does get to decide to do that? Because, I'm not sure it's fair for anybody to be able to make those decisions. And at the end of the day, the plants and animals that are there are some unique ones. There's unique invertebrates there's unique flora, but every ecosystem is unique. And if we are going to be making a value judgment as a country or as an industry about how much these things are worth versus how much the coal beneath them is worth, I think we're going to have to reckon with some pretty uncomfortable truths there when we come face to face with the fact that once we get that coal out, we can only use it once, but you can visit that plateau as much as you like, so long as it's still there.
Now, I know a lot of protesters have been very vocal about this. Talk us through some of the protests in the past. How large are they, on the ground, and what have they been up to?
So I think there's been protest action in this area for decades now. I believe, if memory serves me right, there was the Happy Valley occupation some time ago. And I think a more recent action on the coast there was when protesters climbed into those coal buckets. Basically, the mining company has these big buckets on like sort of a ski lift thing where they bring the coal up to the processing facility, and they climbed into those and occupied them for 3 days, displayed banners, made a big statement. I think there were some good headlines and photos that came out of that. I think I took a FaceTime call from one of them in the bucket on day 2 to see what was going on there. And, people talk about the Happy Valley occupation, what that meant, and how this is very much just the ripples of the same movement, decades later. No matter who they are, if they're taking operations on that plateau, I think there's going to be opposition to it. It's just a question of how loud they get.
How's the mining company responded to this protest action, the criticism, the fallout, the fight back? What are they saying to this, Fox?
So when I spoke with the head of BT Mining about this, I think about 6 months ago, sort of around the time that those buckets were occupied, they were obviously unhappy about that. That does slow down their operations. That's not good for them. Whenever I speak to mining industry representatives who really do truly believe in what mining can do, it feels like, it's an ideological argument. They think that the protesters getting in these buckets is genuinely getting in the way of prosperity on the West Coast, right? And when you have someone who believes that going up against someone who believes the exact opposite, that this mining company is getting in the way of the intrinsic values of the ecosystem here, that's an ideological debate, and it's very difficult to parse that out into numbers that can maybe be convincing to somebody not involved in that industry. But I think that the safety of the workers is paramount for the company. Of course, they're not going to put anybody in harm's way if that's a problem. I don't think anybody necessarily was put in harm's way from what I can tell. But, I think that if somebody climbed into my coal buckets, I'd be peeved, but I think that's the point.
Yeah. What about, though? I've done interviews in the past with mining companies as part of protests in other areas in New Zealand, and they say, look, the way we mine now is not the way we used to mine, and they're very aware of their environmental footprint and to make sure that they leave the land as they arrived.
If you look at Stockton Mine, the conservation work that they're doing up on that site is absolutely phenomenal. You can't mine without doing something to the environment. But if you do it in the right way, the benefits outweigh the negatives. At the moment, the demand is there for coal around the world. In the past, the rules were different.
Is modern mining, is there an argument to say actually they do a good job, they provide jobs, they provide, a service for New Zealand that is much needed, so we should get in behind and support them?
Yes and no. I think the argument that mining is different now than it was in the past is without a doubt true, 100%. That the methods, and the responsibilities involved with that are completely different to what they were, back in the day, or whatever we're going to call it, with the type of mining that we're now having to pay for the acid mine drainage cleanup of. Things are run better now, but that is not to say that they are perfect. And, again, any sort of tailings pond created where you store the waste from this stuff will fail eventually. It is just a question of when, and there's nothing the mining company can do about that besides just not mining. That's part and parcel with this process. And when we make the argument of, are they providing an important service here? Are they creating jobs in the local economy? Again, they absolutely are doing those things. It's just a question of, are they doing them in a way that you couldn't do them with a different industry, tourism, agriculture, something like that? And then, how much of this money is actually staying on shore in the first place?
Bathurst is a New Zealand company, but most of its shareholders are overseas.
Driving around the Buller area, you're not like going down double wide lanes with mansions on every side, right? Like it's not the Hollywood Hills. And maybe that's just because that's not the type of architecture they're into. I don't know. But the lucrative industry here is not exactly expressed in the average visit to a West Coast township, to put it lightly. And this isn't even gold mining or anything. This is coal mining, which isn't quite as lucrative as those things. So a lot of these economies do rely on this significantly. And every local economy is going to rely on something different. It's just, I think, especially tricky when the thing you're relying on is a limited resource, and it's a limited resource. And the whole reason it's, stressful in a lot of ways is because you have to keep trying to find more of it. It's a very boom and bust economy. And for better or for worse, that's what mining communities rely on. And that's a whole other topic. But I think that the arguments here around what it's worth are tricky. And they're especially tricky because the value fluctuates, but you're trying to compare the value of a mineral export to the value of an ecosystem, which, like I said earlier, you can't really put a value on. So when we frame these discussions in an economic sense, I think we end up sort of barking up the wrong tree.
Now, as I mentioned earlier, Bathurst has been approved to apply for fast-track approval for its consents, but so far it hasn't submitted any application. Before Fox addresses this, here's mining boss Robert Eckford on the fast-track benefits.
And this fast-track approval bill aims to take permitting for a major infrastructure project, whether it's mining, whether it's housing. It takes it from permitting of what was historically 2 or 3 years down to 6 months. And in the mining space, that's huge.
Critics argue Fast Track takes away too many rights from the public, but that doesn't wash with Resources Minister Shane Jones.
The Fast Track one-stop shop legislation was seen as the best way for us to reinvigorate the economy. Mm-hmm. There'll always be guardrails, but our government's not going to tolerate the weaponisation of the environment, the weaponisation of wildlife. It's one of a host of factors that needs to be considered, and the fast-track legislation will give such matters status, but it doesn't hide the fact that the overarching purpose of this fast-track one-stop shop is economic development.
I think what's riled people up, especially in the environmentalist and opposition space, are two things. One, that there's no hard environmental constraints in the purpose statement of the bill, which constrains how people can make decisions in it. So they're not really required to consider the environment like they may have done previously. And two, the amount of public consultation and input that's required. This is a particularly tricky one because there's been a recent amendment bill put forward to the fast track under the auspices of grocery industry legislation. And, if you actually go into that bill, I think the grocery sector is mentioned like once. Mining is mentioned more often. And what this amendment bill is going to do is restrict who and when an expert panel in charge of a fast track application can call in public witnesses. And so the fear is that this is going to have a big chilling effect on public consultation. If people aren't required to be invited, they won't be invited, their evidence won't be presented. The panel will be limited to considering the evidence before them and might not be able to make the decisions that they have been making, which have generally pleased the environmental sector. Now, this mine has not yet applied for the fast track. So if those amendments enter and pass before the end of the year, it seems likely that it would be considered under the amended fast track. So we'll see what the implications of that are. The company had a sort of 6-month delay. They were expected to put in that application this month. I don't think it has come in yet. If they had applied 6 months ago, perhaps they would have been considered under the way that it's working right now. What does that world look like? How are those decisions different? I don't really know. But I think that, as we go forward, the coal in this area is going to be a target for someone always, no matter what. And the legislation of the day may make that easier or harder to get to, but this issue will keep burning for as long as we are burning coal, in short.
So, does he think the change prompted Bathurst to hold off on applying?
I don't necessarily think that they were waiting for this, unless somehow they knew it was coming. But the mining company was saying that there was more front-end loading than they'd thought, I believe was the phrase they used. Maybe more details had to go into the application than they thought. I've heard from people going through the process that it is very intense. You really need to have everything set up exactly how you want it. And as it should be, it's a very powerful piece of legislation. But either way, it probably has proved to be a prudent move. One way or another, maybe they want the advantage of moving second here.
Well, that brings me to this, because obviously you've been covering this for well over a year now. What's the most likely outcome? Smooth approval, messy fight, or a major rethink?
Well, if you'd asked me that when the fast track became law, I would have guessed that it would be a relatively quick approval for the project with some protest action on the side. What I've been surprised to see is that they haven't even applied yet. This has taken longer. The protest action has been more dramatic than I thought it would be. And the decisions that the fast track panels have been making have not been complete environmental overrides. They've worked within the confines of that act in a way that seems to be, to me, pretty reasonable, which, good. That's a good thing to see. How this amendment changes that, I don't know. I did not expect this amendment to be something coming down the pipe. I'm not entirely surprised to see it, but how this will change things moving forward, I don't know. I think what I can tell you, it won't be is smooth sailing. There's no way. Just how contentious this is already is going to continue. And I think once we ascribe value and controversy to a project and it becomes sort of the face of a social issue, it is almost impossible to decouple that. So going forward, this is New Zealand's largest source of coal. It is going to be where opponents of coal focus their energy. I think that's just how it's going to be. And if they want to keep operating in this area, which they obviously do, that's going to just be another factor in complicating the matter for them.
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Foxmire and also to Frank Film. Some of the audio used today was from the RNZ doco. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by Phil Benj. I'm Amanda Gillies. Matua.